Welcome everybody to our video podcast series, It's Good to Talk. Myself and Nick have wanted to do something like this for some time, at least a couple of years. We were talking about doing something like this pre-COVID. We wanted to get together to talk about the power of simple but profound conversations and the difference they can make on engagement and performance at work for individuals and for organisations. So we're really pleased to be pulling this together, and really the flow of the podcast is to look at the difference that good human connection can have on our working relationships. So we're really pleased to share with you this 3-episode series where we're going to zoom in on varying aspects of conversation and connection at work. In each discussion, we've got a great guest panel that have an interest and expertise in landing some of this stuff within large organisations. And today we're really delighted to have Sarah Spencer from WaterAid and Gary Shewan from Legal and General that have joined us to share the work that they've been doing in these areas a little bit later in the session. Today's session is all about connection in turbulent times, which we've all had a lot of recently and continue to have. We know that the pace of change is only really increasing, creating turbulence and new and different ways of working, whether that's AI, automation, evolving products and services just to stay ahead. And we know that all of this stuff has implications on organisations, their leaders and their people. And we know more now than we've ever known about things like neuroscience and how this affects us. And we know the importance of good, genuine connection and conversations can have on us from a neuroscience perspective. So I'm going to hand over to Nick to share the backdrop of our interest and research in this area over the years. So over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah. So yes, it's a fascinating subject, and this interesting conversations goes back many years now, and I think it's been prompted by a couple of things. We were increasingly frustrated as we work with our clients about the inability of their performance management systems to deliver and really motivate and engage with people. And it seemed to us that more and more work was going into improving and enriching the system in the hope that that would improve the quality of performance management rather than anything else. So we were thinking about that. And then as employee engagement became even more of a subject, something that people were really interested in, looking to measure, this whole subject of how engaged our employees are, we saw the same pattern repeating. And we saw, unfortunately, a very top-down and structured approach to employee engagement, which usually resulted in just sharing results and saying what you're going to do about it. And we could see that our clients were getting frustrated with this. And we were looking for ways that actually, what's the way to unpick this and make it more real? So giving it some thought and given the work that we'd done over a while, we believed that the answer was to make it a very personal, a very one-to-one, a very engaging approach, both to employee engagement and to performance management. And our belief was that there was a simple chain reaction that you could identify where the key was really open, honest, truthful, real conversations that a manager typically would have with people who worked for them, but also that could be held in different directions as well. Because we knew all of the evidence suggests that it's the relationship with the line manager that is usually the biggest determinant as to whether people actually feel motivated and want to stay, which are two of the, and give of their best, which are some of the indicators of real engagement and motivation. And we know if that's the case, then that will lead to more engagement. And we know that from the data that more engagement will lead to improved and outstanding business performance. So we were sure that this chain reaction was the way to go. And it was by taking it down to the level of individual conversation. We were very fortunate, and I won't go into detail now, but we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to try this out on large scale with one of the global leading pharmaceutical companies who had real engagement and communication issues within their R&D function, and were desperate to find a way where managers could actually engage with their teams, where they could be more aligned, where the quality and the direction of work was more engaged. And we were part of the solution of zooming in this organization and having really intense sessions with managers and leaders around the power of conversations and the ability to do it. And less about skill and more about intent and more about openness and more about vulnerability, actually, which of course for a lot of people is very hard because that's not been the environment that they've been used to. So again, without going into all the detail of that, we could see, because we worked with thousands of managers over a number of years doing this, that we're able to track that through engagement scores, things were really changing and really coming up. And we'll talk more about that, I think, on another podcast, Andy. So one part of it for us has been taking a lot of these systemic things down to the individual unit, which is a manager and an individual having really open and honest, meaningful conversations. And you're right, Andy, the other thing that we spent a lot of time researching and talking to our partners who are specialists in this area was around neuroscience and understanding more about what really happens to us when we're in these situations at work and we don't feel we can give of our best, when we don't feel psychologically safe, when we withdraw into ourselves. What's going on for us there? What's happening with the amygdala and the freeze that goes on for us? And again, it's once you begin to explore that and understand the research and the data, it's really easy to understand that the best thing you can do to get the most out of people at work is to help them feel psychologically safe so that they're not turning up feeling threatened, they're not feeling pressurized, they're not having constant stress and cortisol running through their body, because they believe they can trust and they can be honest and they can open up to their leaders, their managers, and to each other. So we also spend quite a bit of time helping share our understanding of neuroscience and how that plays a part as well. And you're right, for us, it came down to three things that we think leaders in organizations need to be doing. It's particularly relevant, of course, during times of change and turbulence. The first is a very obvious one. What can they stop doing? Well, they can stop doing things that trigger and other people see as threats and risks and danger. And part of the problem sometimes is they don't even realize they're doing it. So part of this is helping managers and leaders become even more conscious of what they do and how they might deliberately or inadvertently be creating stress and tension and problems for other people. The second is just think about what conditions people need in order to feel more positively engaged and emotion, and just pull those levers. And we believe a big plank of that is through honest two-way conversations that they can have, because it will be slightly different for everybody. You can't generalize about exactly what everybody needs and the conditions that they need. And the third is, if you like, the BS detector, which is to be genuine about their interactions and not to play the management game and not to play the process game, but to realize that they won't always get it right and be perfect. But if they approach relationships and interactions with honesty and integrity and a positive intent, then people will feel that and will want to respond and will want to give back trust to them as well. So they're the three things I think we've been learning and trying to encourage in managers and leaders over the past few years. So they're my initial thoughts, Andy, which you might want to now take off and build on.
Thanks, Nick. Well, actually, what I'm going to do is introduce our panel guests who can kind of build on that. So firstly, I wanted to introduce Gary from Legal & General. Gary, I know there's been some great work going on in this space. I won't steal any of your thunder, but it'd be great just to give a quick intro into who you are, firstly, and the work that you've been doing at a high level at Legal & General.
Yeah. Hi there, all. So I'm Gary Shewan. I'm a L&D consultant, a learning development consultant, Legal & General. I've been there 8 years now. And I think when I joined 8 years ago, my kind of remit and my focus was very much about developing a coaching culture. So that's been a real focus for us over the last kind of 8 years. Very much focused on leadership development. I run a talent program called Step Forward that we've been running for the last 8 years. In fact, I think that's where we first came into contact with you, because we won a Princess Royal Training Award off the back of that 4 years ago. And we've been doing a lot of work around leading with emotional intelligence, which I guess we initially started talking about this a couple of years ago about being more sophisticated coaching conversations. So it's built on the culture that we already kind of have in place at the minute. So yeah, kind of high level, those are the things that I kind of focus on at the moment.
Sarah from WaterAid, so it'd be good to hear who you are and what your focuses are at the moment at WaterAid, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been at WaterAid now for about 3.5 years. I'm leading at the moment on 3 main areas, leadership development being one of them, coaching, similar to what you were saying, Gary, really trying to get that coaching culture across the organisation. And more recently, well-being and mental health. So during the pandemic, that became a more formalised focus for us as an organisation. So those are the 3 areas I'm leading on at the moment. But prior to that, at WaterAid and previously, I've also been very heavily involved in management development as well. So I think some of what we're talking about today around those conversations, I think cutting through all the levels and all the tiers of the organisation, and general learning and development as well. So I've kind of been across all of those areas, but yeah, leadership, coaching and wellbeing and the intersection between those 3 are kind of what I'm looking at the moment.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, both. So we've got some space now just to explore conversations and the work that you're both doing in your respective organisations. So I guess just kicking us off with a bit of a question, really. What do you think are the important conversations that we should be having right now in these turbulent times? You might be seeing them happening, or maybe it's some work that you're doing to have more of them within your organisations.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there, Andy, because I mean, Nick, even in your introduction, there was kind of a lot of things I was writing down. Is this 2 or 3 hour podcast? Is it? Because I think this, and I guess the conversations around building trust. And as you were talking, Nick, I was thinking about the point you made there about people won't always get it right, and absolutely your point there about kind of relationships with line managers are so key. And I'm thinking about a conversation with my line manager that we have every month. He'll ask me on a scale of 1 to 10 how engaged I feel, how are things going that month, and he'll ask me to share things that are not going so well. And I feel comfortable sharing the things that are not going well because I know he's not going to hold it against me at my kind of mid-year or end-of-year review. And we'll have really good conversations around things that haven't gone as well. And we'll kind of explore that in a little bit more detail. And I don't know if you guys have come across black box thinking, which is very much about that. It's about exploring the things and feeling comfortable. And I think that's where the psychological safety comes into it for me as well. So yeah, I think for me, the conversations that are around building trust and building that 2-way trust with your line manager, because for me, that's been a big focus for us the last couple of years.
I would agree with that in the sense that I feel like there's been an explosion over the last couple of years across any organisation where the expectation has shifted, and so the focus can and should no longer just be on the work we're doing, but how are the humans behind the work we're doing, and therefore, you know, we've got to have great conversations, right, to be able to unlock that. And personally, I've just been having this increased excitement, I think, if I'm being honest, because my whole career so far, I feel like I've really struggled in organisations where focus on good quality conversations to build the stuff we've mentioned, psychological safety, trust, even a sense of belonging wasn't prioritised, but now there seems to be more of a spotlight being shone on the power of that and the importance of it in connection with whatever that organisation is trying to do. So, you know, for us in WaterAid, we have a huge mission. We're trying to get like water, sanitation and hygiene to everyone everywhere. It's pretty tricky to do that, but it's really tricky to do that if individuals are not sort of well in themselves, they're not heard, they don't have that safe space. So I think for me and for us over the last little while, we've really been trying to look at what are the conversations we can have that contribute to that sense of safety. And I think you made the point, Nick, usually it comes down to a one-on-one conversation with your manager or your peer or another colleague, but just the quality of that conversation, and as I like to call it, the humanity living in the sidelines, like just the off conversations that you have that really help you feel, I'm safe here, I belong here, I can speak up here, I can challenge here. Like you said, Gary, I can fail here and it's okay. I'm not gonna like get a P45 or I'm gonna get, you know, chastised for it. I think they're everyday conversations that we have. We sometimes put labels on it. It's a performance conversation. It's a difficult conversation. But for me, at the heart of it is every conversation you go into every day is an opportunity to create safety and trust.
Yeah, can I just, again, there's something that kind of resonates with me. I remember in my early career, I think I used to get quite a lot of feedback around I wasn't very good at company politics. And I think I've worked in organizations where I haven't felt psychologically safe. And for me, I think if I kind of jumping forward 20, 30 years in my career, I think people who challenge things within organizations are quite often seen as positive disruptors. And I think it's a nice shift because, again, not worrying about not about not worrying about company politics, but about being free to kind of speak your mind and challenge. And I think that's something that we've really worked on in our organization. And I think I feel in a really safe environment that if I challenge things, it's seen that I'm coming, that it's coming from a good place. So yeah, just kind of relating to what you said there, Sarah, about kind of at this moment, I work in an organization where I've never felt so psychologically safe and feel comfortable to challenge. And however senior the leadership team are, then they're kind of they're generally, I mean, all right, we talk about having an open door, but they're proactively have an open door where they have coffee and chat and bring along what you want to challenge, what you want to ask us about, and what direction should we be going. So yeah, just like I say, just kind of thinking about that term company politics. I used to get told I wasn't good at the company politics, but now I might be seen as a positive disruptor if I do challenge the norm. So
Gary, am I right in saying from other conversations we've had that one of the key measures that you take in your pulses at Legal & General is around psychological safety? It's not actually termed in that way.
Yeah.
Essentially it measures it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. As a question, which is I feel free to speak out without negative consequence of self-image, status and career. And that we've measured that as a benchmark when we started delivering our Leading with Emotional Intelligence program 2 years ago. We've had that as a benchmark, and it's been it's phenomenal as far as the increase in that score for that question over the last year and a half, 2 years. It's gone from 64 to 74. It's not exactly a percentage, but it's again, when there's like 9 business areas that we've worked in, and in every single business area over the last year and a half, 2 years. And I think, again, Nick, something you said earlier on, and absolutely, I was talking about this in a session I was running this morning. It isn't about skill. It is absolutely about intent and that vulnerability. And we've had some senior leaders, and I know, Andy, we've talked about this in the past with the program that we've been running. We had our most senior stakeholder joined. In fact, they haven't just joined a session. They've been through the whole program, but they've also just ad hoc joined in some of the sessions that we've ran. And one of the senior leaders was openly talking about challenges he'd had, some personal challenges that he had, and demonstrated such a phenomenal level of vulnerability that the whole tone of the sessions just changed because people then felt comfortable sharing some of their vulnerabilities. And that was a big point, a really important starting point for us when we started delivering this program about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, because of the vulnerability and the intent from that senior leader.
I actually just really want to jump in on what you've just said, because I've noticed a similar thing that has been happening organically with some of our senior leaders. And I do think some of it is attributable to the impact of COVID and the pandemic over the last couple of years, where there's been an opening up and a willingness to be more vulnerable and lead by example by sharing. And we've seen through the power of somebody role modeling that, the permission it gives to other people to do the same and the safety it creates. And again, just because we've been a bit more formalized in our approach around how we support employees' wellbeing and mental health, we developed a bit of a strategy 2 years ago, and then I put a plan together for some things we could do, and one of those was creating an internal podcast which is specifically designed to do three things. One, raise awareness of wellbeing initiatives around our federation globally, to invite external people in who are sort of professionals or experts in some area in the world of wellbeing and mental health. But the one I get most excited about, and I think has the biggest impact, is conversations with WaterAiders around the organisation, talking very vulnerably and openly about what's going on for them. It can be anything from their experience of anxiety and depression and the impacts that has on them at work and what helps them at work, all the way through to conversations around the pandemic, or conversations around what we can do to create more psychological safety. And the kind of ripple effect I noticed that have with other people reaching out, going, oh, it's incredible to hear that country director share about his experience of depression, or it's incredible to hear that head of department talking about what they do to try and create psychological safety and trust. I now feel a bit more empowered myself that I could talk openly at work. And I think particularly when you're if you have personal experience of that not being safe to do so, and you marry that with maybe a local context and culture, or direct line manager who maybe doesn't role model that for you, if you can see that somewhere else and hear that in other conversations in the organization, it can start to just break down that stigma and the barrier to those conversations. And now that we've noticed that, trying to sort of proactively harness it a bit more and keep going with it, because and embed it, I think, like you've been doing, Gary, into our leadership and management development programs, actually explicitly talking about psychological safety, trust. What is that? How are you doing that? How are you breaking that? And we weren't really doing that before. We weren't explicitly talking about it, and now we are. It sort of gives permission for people to open up a bit more, be a bit more honest, be a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, can I jump in one final time here? Because again, I think it's linking so nicely, the things you're talking about there, and it's that whole permission piece. And what we've done is, through the program that we've been delivering, we put people into learning buddies. And there's no hierarchy with those learning buddies. It was a bit of a random selection, make sure that these people didn't know each other before, put them into 2s or 3s. And even as the trainers who delivered this program, we've been involved in that process. And it was about 3-4 months ago, I was catching up with my learning buddy, and he was sharing that in one of the breakout rooms during the training. He was paired up in a breakout room on Teams with one of the senior leadership team. And they were asked to kind of get to know each other by asking some fairly simple, but I guess effective questions. And one of the questions was, tell me something about you I don't already know that'll help me get the best out of you or help build our relationship. And again, this senior leader and this guy who's one of our people managers suddenly found out they had something in common, some personal challenges that they'd been through. And he said, all of a sudden, this senior leader who I've seen on a pedestal, all of a sudden I felt that we're on the same level. And he said, it's so nice because when we have been in the office, I've seen him, we've had a catch up, and it's really broke down barriers in a way that I've never seen before. And again, that's not about skills. It's about that, I guess, like you say, the intent of vulnerability and just the mindset. Actually, let's just try something a little bit different here in the kind of questions that we're asking people.
I think that's great, Gary. And I think a couple of thoughts for me. One of the unintended possible positive consequences of the pandemic is that in a very visible way, everybody has been brought down to the same level. You know, whether you're the CEO, you're still working at home with your kids running out through the door and you're there in your casual clothes, or, you know, so I think in a funny sort of way, that this sort of pandemic has in a way enabled us to see each other more on the same level and have an opportunity to start having different sorts of conversations as well. That's one first up. So I think seize the opportunity, I think I would say. And the other thing is just touching back, I liked your black box thing, Gary, because people listening to this might think, okay, that's great. And isn't it lovely? We can all have open conversations, be very nurturing and supportive of each other, which of course is what holds us together. But of course, the thing we all need to remember is that there need to be tough conversations at times as well, but they're much, much more effective and more acceptable when we've built a platform of trust and honesty and respect for each other, because then we can have any sort of conversation that we need to have. So this is it's a platform in order to have really honest conversations in all directions, really. And I think that's just really important.
Absolutely, Nick. I guess just sparking a question in my mind that I'd be interested in everybody's thoughts in, and that is, these conversations, they all sound great, but how do we go about getting people to have these types of better conversation, more psychologically safe, that are opening up conversation? Because for some leaders out there, they may have tried to get into open conversations before and failed, and maybe worry about going there again. What would be your top tips for getting into really good conversations?
Two hands.
Yeah,
Go on,
should I
Gary.
go?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think I've never been a fan of sheep dipping people through development programs. It's never been something I've been a major fan of. But I think what we've done recently over the last couple of years, where we've had our senior leaders, first of all, lead by example and go through the program to kind of give it sign off. But we have put all of the managers so we've had 154 managers go through this program in the last year and a half, with something like 98, 99% attendance of 6 modules. But the reason it's been powerful is, yes, we might have a couple hours workshop where the attendance has been phenomenal, but it's what they've been doing in between the workshops has made a difference. Where we've been saying, okay, put some of these techniques into practice. Let's have some building trust conversations. Let's look at different ways of showing genuine appreciation. Let's catch up in 2, 3, 4 weeks' time. Let's share what's worked. Let's share what hasn't worked. And we kind of run them as a little bit of an action learning set for half an hour, 45 minutes at the next session, where people are sharing what's worked, what hasn't worked, and feeling comfortable out saying, actually, this didn't really work as well as I thought. And then the rest of the group will say, well, why don't you try some of these techniques? I tried a little bit different. I mean, even we've had some really good examples over last year where people are saying, actually, we've got our offices near Hove Park, and one of the senior leaders said, actually, we have an hour conversations now. We have a 30-minute check-in every week, and we'll have it walking around the park. Let's just put our technology down. Let's just walk around the park with a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden you're feeling in a different kind of environment. And not everybody could do that, but I think it is about trying different things. But this action learning set formats really work for us, where people are sharing best practice. And I think what people have been really good at, it's become a little bit, I don't know what's the right phrase to use, but as facilitators, we've stepped back because the managers are saying, I tried this, it worked really well, why don't you give it a go? I had the same challenges that you had, so I slightly changed it. Or we had an individual said that they had a really honest conversation with somebody about their behavior, and there was lots of tears, so they thought it didn't land right. But what they reflected on in the next session is those tears had opened up a lot of things that they wouldn't have got if they hadn't had that honest conversation. And now all of a sudden, overnight, the trust with that individual has really grown because the tears brought a lot of sharing of things that they hadn't shared previously. So it's probably quite a long answer to your question, Andy, but I think it is about trying things a little bit different. The action learning format for me absolutely works, where people feel comfortable sharing what's worked and what hasn't worked. And for a team, we do a lot of stuff on Teams at the minute, and it's cameras on. Let's have look at the whites of each other's eyes, and let's set some contracting around how we're going to work together here.
Right, good stuff. Thanks, Gary. Sarah, anything to build on?
Yeah, I'd say similarly, what Gary's just said has really made me think that I'm not sure I'd really realised this before until this moment, that the things that are helpful in this scenario are when you can create those spaces for people to do that sharing that you're talking about. So for example, to your question, Andy, how can people have those conversations? What happens if it doesn't go well? And tips to get over it. Well, what if you're talking with other colleagues who are in the same position, and you hear you're not alone, and you hear how they've gone about it, what worked, what didn't work, and you not only get tips and ideas, but you also get a confidence, that actually you might fail sometimes, and it might not be perfect, and it might go wrong, but that as we said earlier, the intention is important, and the willingness to keep going and trying is really important. So within our both our leadership and management program in different ways, we've been trying to increase those spaces where we can make the connection with what are you really feeling and thinking. Let's bring that and connect that with what we're learning here together. and in a space where you can share that with other peers who are actually probably going through a similar thing, in order that you build a collaborative, confident space to share. So you're almost like practicing that sharing in that space, and it's safe before you're going back to do that, you know, in your day-to-day with your team. And the other point I was going to make was just around role modeling. So I don't think I have seen this where there's been a willingness, and it doesn't have to be a senior leader, just any individual willing to role model having those conversations, role modeling creating safety and trust, role modeling creating an inclusive, belonging environment. It does have an impact. It doesn't have to be directly in the team that you're working in, for example. It has a ripple effect. So I think the power to help people role model, and yes, often that does need to be from a leadership management perspective, and we've been focusing on leaders and managers mostly because from a manager perspective, I think we have about 40% of people in WaterAid are people managers, which I know is a lot higher than the average. So we know we've got this kind of critical mass there, where if we can really harness and focus support, it's going to have a massive impact on the rest of the organization. So we have been really focusing on leaders and managers more proactively. And in the programs, yeah, how do we create the space for you to almost experience this and practice and fail safely, and then go out and do it, but know that it's to have the emotional intelligence really to raise your self-awareness, be willing to kind of regulate and keep going with it. And so the creation of those spaces outside of those programs are what's helping us as well. So we're doing it for a new initiative. We've got wellbeing and mental health, and again allowing people to come together and talk about I had this conversation, it didn't go well, and I'm really frightened now, I don't quite know what to do. And you can talk about that in an open, safe space with your peers who might have had a similar situation. So I think creating that kind of opportunity for people is incredibly important if we want people to have these conversations successfully and sustainably.
Andy, you talk about leadership shadow, don't you? And I think that's a great example that of of kind of behavior breeds behavior, doesn't it? So again, all these cliches, but they're true.
And it seems to me it's conversations within and about conversations, isn't it? You know, it's kind of the currency. I mean, just a quick thought for me, Andy, on that as well. We've said for a long time at Oxford, one of our beliefs really is that we believe most people come to work, or all people come to work, wanting to do a good job, if only their organisations would let them. Well, if I can just slightly paraphrase that, I think most people would want to come to work and have great conversations, if only we could remove the barriers to them having it. You know, we have great conversations outside of work. Why don't we come to work and have great conversations? Because we accept all of these pressures and barriers and other restraints on us in how we believe we're meant to behave. So I think this is about people just turning up as themselves, as human beings, wanting to do and say the right things, and not being overly constrained by a lot of the organizational clutter.
Just before we close, I just wanted to go around the room, or the virtual room, so to speak, just to gather some closing thoughts, really. I know this is something we're all passionate about, but what are the one or two things that have jumped out from this conversation, or from your wider interest in these conversations, particularly in turbulent times, as a key takeaway? So I don't know if anybody wants to kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, I've written something down, Andy, that again I was thinking about, and it links to what Nick was talking about at the beginning. I think that mindset thing element for me is absolutely key, and about having an open mind. And can I give a practical example of that? So I know when we first started delivering the program, it was literally as lockdown happened, and we had a lot of managers saying, "Oh, I cannot have one-to-ones in teams. It's not going to feel right. I'm going to wait till we get back in the room." Well, okay. But the other thing is we'd have a lot of managers saying, but I've had this person work for me 10, 15 years. I know their mindset, it isn't going to change. So what's the point of me trying to build trust with them? And we were like, just give it a go. Let's just take a different approach. And the amount of people that have come back to us and said, you know, and I think a great example we talked about this the other week, Andy, about managers would say on a Monday morning, so how's your weekend been? And you don't get a lot from that. But if you say, okay, and if I said to you, Andy, what's been the best part of your weekend? you will probably tell me a little bit more information. And we've had managers who've just simply changed the kind of questions, changed their mindset and said, okay, so John, what's been the best part of your weekend? And John might reveal and tell them something that they didn't know about that person. And then all of a sudden it opens up doors to start to find out things they've got in common. And ultimately that's, and again, if you think about the trust pyramid, you start to get a bit more understanding of people's values, people's beliefs, more than just have they had a good weekend or not. So I think it's just about trying some different techniques and changing our mindset to be a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gary. Sarah, what about yourself?
I mean, I'd echo the mindset piece for sure. I couldn't echo that enough. I really agree with Gary's point on that. I think a couple of other things is just one around, I really see spending the time and the effort to have good quality human conversations, as you said, Nick, is really about sharpening the axe. You know, if you're I know managers who are worrying about, oh, it's a waste of time, we need to get the job done, we need to be talking about, well, it's not, is it? Because if you are spending the time doing that, to the earlier point, when you need a difficult conversation, you've already laid the foundation to be able to have that more successfully. You're able to help people thrive and not survive. You're able to actually get the best out of people. I mean, the impact of that is tremendous. Is it the positive impact on retention, productivity, you name it. So taking the time, and I guess that's in connection with the mindset and really valuing it and seeing it as useful. And the other thing, I just loved what you just said, Nick, about how do we remove the barriers to help people just come to work and have good conversations. It really wasn't until I joined WaterAid, and I think that the impact of the last couple of years, that I realized that the thing I've been struggling with my whole career is I just couldn't really be myself at work. And I couldn't honestly and authentically show up as Sarah. And that meant that I never gave my full self to the job or the organization. And so that's just the thing I'm going away thinking is, yeah, how do we get better at identifying all those barriers and then stripping them back and just bringing it down to human connection in service of us doing a great job, thriving and achieving whatever the organizational goals are. And I know it sounds really, really simple, and yet I think it's really powerful and really is what's needed. And I think to just bring that back to, you know, the turbulent times we've had and the uncertainty, actually, what do people want? They want clarity, engagement, a sense of belonging and a sense of achievement. And actually, we're not going to get that if we're not willing to take the time to just have that personal human connection. So I think for me, that's the kind of biggest resounding points, I think.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, lovely. Nick.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. And I think the real beauty of this, for organizations is this is really cheap solution, you know, because at the end of the day, you don't have to spend thousands and millions training people to do this. You simply need to get the messages out there, the role modeling out there, the permission out there, and the acceptance that sometimes people will get this wrong or they'll stumble or whatever it might be. So it's a beautifully simple, cheap solution, which actually is, to your point, Gary, just giving people a few useful questions that they can start asking, or a slight variation on the question they ask, can achieve, you know, all sorts of things that they wouldn't have achieved before. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, especially now, to just start shifting and nudging the culture slightly by demonstrating it's okay to have these conversations, and wow, look how powerful they are. You know, that would be my takeaway.
Can I just finish off on one thing? Sorry, Andy. And it again echoes what you said there, Nick. So I started a program this morning, and a lot of the managers were saying, so what do we need to be doing extra? What kind of work do we need to be doing? It's like, you're not doing anything extra. You're just doing things slightly different. So when you're having your monthly one-to-ones, your weekly one-to-ones, we're just giving you some little techniques to try out. So it's not extra, it's just slightly different. And I think, yeah, absolutely, that echoes what you said, Nick. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And it's not rocket science.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way to end it, actually, Gary. It's not rocket science. It's just a case of that positive intention and creating I think you said, the space and conditions, an opportunity for these conversations, Sarah. So I think, yeah, just urge all of you leaders out there that are listening to this, just go there with a positive intention, and that makes such a big difference in opening up these conversations. And it's amazing how many of your team will follow you when you go in with that positive intention. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. We could go on for much longer than we will today, but why not check out the other 2 discussions we're going to be having in the Good to Talk series. These will be available on the Oxford Group's YouTube channel. So find them on the channel or subscribe to our page, and you'll also be able to find a link on the insights pages on the Oxford Group website if you find it difficult to get to. So big thanks to our guests, and happy conversations, everyone.